Deep within a certain forest, a group of adventurers was facing off against an S-rank dragon beast. A single breath, a mere flick of its tail was enough to blow away an entire section of the forest. The dragon roared furiously, displaying its overwhelming dominance. But in a nearby village, a farmer continued tending to his fields diligently, completely unconcerned with what was happening on the other side of the forest. Al was a farmer who had received a divine blessing with the title Nature's Beloved, granting him the world's favor and an attack power exceeding 73,000. He knew this was an astronomical number, but didn't pay it much mind. However, while hauling his produce to the royal capital's market, he stumbled upon a group of adventurers struggling desperately against the dragon. Al wanted to draw its attention toward himself so the others could retreat safely. So he hurled a carrot straight at the dragon flying overhead, never expecting that this single strike would cause it to explode and vaporize in midair. Al himself was surprised but didn't really care. He was more concerned about selling all his produce, so he continued his journey toward the capital. But somehow, trouble just kept finding him. While going through the entry procedures with the gate guards, he spotted a thug kidnapping a young woman and rushing toward the city gate to escape. Al couldn't just stand by and watch, so he leaped in to rescue the girl from the villain's grasp. The thug pulled out a knife to attack Al, but he easily disarmed the weapon and threw him to the ground. He accomplished this thanks to his clairvoyance ability, which allowed him to see his opponent's attacks before they happened. The soldiers immediately rushed over, bound the criminal, and took him away. The rescued girl wanted to repay him, but Al had already hopped onto his cart and disappeared because he was late for selling his goods. Determined not to lose track of her savior, the girl decided to wait at the city gate, ready to stop him the moment he appeared. This person was none other than First Princess Falwise of the royal capital Magus. The princess had recognized Al's potential and wanted to invite him to serve the royal family. After all, the man Al had just taken down that morning had a base stat of 500. Ordinary people in this world had a stat of 50. Adventurers had 130, knight captains had 600, and legendary heroes had 1,000. Al had no intention of agreeing. He just wanted to live an ordinary life, tilling the soil in his fields. Besides, his current stat was a whopping 65,000. If he showed that to the princess, she would probably faint on the spot. The three adventurers who had been hunting the dragon earlier had also returned. Seizing the moment while they were reporting their results, Al slipped away immediately. He breathed a sigh of relief, finally able to head home. Unlike him, Princess Fall and the king received news that a horde of monsters was advancing toward them. The scene was so terrifying it seemed as if Hellzone had returned. Long ago, the leader of Hellzone, Demon King Macbeth, had been slain by a hero. To prevent such battles from happening again, humans had signed a peace treaty with the demon race. However, Chancellor Seychel believed this attack might be the work of demons harboring grudges over the Demon King's defeat. The leader of this assault was most likely Romeo, commander of the former Demon King's First Legion. From the very beginning, this man had no intention of honoring the peace agreement. He had used it to make them let their guard down. Moreover, he had likely realized that the hero who once defeated the Demon King no longer existed. Seychel urged the king and princess to flee the palace immediately, perhaps even the entire capital. But the king refused to abandon his people. Seychel admired his spirit, but to him, the king was someone who absolutely had to survive. It was because of the king's rule that they had followed him all this time. Losing him would be a loss for both the people and the kingdom. Hearing this, the king had no choice but to agree to retreat from the capital. Al arrived home exhausted. On top of that, he couldn't control his strength and accidentally broke the door handle. He plopped down with a sigh, but before long, his close friend Testa came banging on the door. He had come to warn Al about the monsters swarming toward them. But instead of worrying about his own life, Al was more concerned about the crops nearing harvest time. He dashed out to his fields to save whatever he could, but the monsters completely ignored the village and the fields, marching in formation straight toward the capital. Al decided not to get involved since he was just a farmer. Stopping monsters was the knight's job, not his concern. But then he thought about how the capital being destroyed would mean he couldn't sell his produce anymore, so he felt he needed to do something. Meanwhile, the princess and king were being led to safety by Seychel, never suspecting that he was actually taking them somewhere to be eliminated. He was a demon, his true name Romeo. Unlike the previous Demon King's method of completely annihilating a country, he would now choose to impersonate the king and seize control of the kingdom. Having the entire population ruled by demons would be far more beneficial than crushing a nation to dust. He unleashed an attack that pierced through the royal family's protective magic barrier, seriously wounding the king. Just as the two had begun to accept their fate, Al appeared out of nowhere, swinging his hoe down with such force that the ground exploded, shattering Romeo's technique. The demon couldn't believe how a mere farmer could accomplish such a feat. He ignored Al's rambling about soil cultivation and teleported behind him to attack. But unexpectedly, Al caught the incoming sword with his bare hands, then grabbed and flung Romeo crashing into the rock face. At this point, Romeo realized who had been thwarting his long-planned scheme. He decided to transform into his true form. His stats skyrocketed to level 78, fearing no one. But Al showed no fear whatsoever. With just a single punch, he successfully defeated the demon without breaking a sweat. Seeing their leader taken down so swiftly, the minions fled in terror. The king wanted to reward Al with something and offered him a position in the Night Order, but Al simply didn't want to lose his market for selling produce. The princess understood Al's personality well and said nothing more, only granting him a plot of land for farming and hoping he would help them drive away monsters in the future. Al agreed to this request without hesitation. The next day, the princess took Al to join a guild. This farmer had no interest in anything except food. They quickly arrived at the Adventurers Guild building. Al made it clear up front that he had no desire to become an adventurer. This was merely to make it more convenient for him to assist the royal family. The place was no different from a tavern, filled with all sorts of people. The moment he stepped in, an old man who was the guild master dragged him to the reception desk to register as a new member. The receptionist Helen took his paperwork and asked why a farmer would want to become an adventurer. Al answered honestly that someone had given him land for farming on the condition that he exterminate monsters, so he wanted adventuring as a side job. The adventurers who had been fighting in the forest were also present. They immediately recognized him as the one who had slain the S-rank dragon with a single strike. Hearing this, the entire lobby couldn't believe it and began buzzing with discussion. When these people heard Al was a farmer, they showed no contempt whatsoever and politely introduced themselves. They were Jake, Lamia, and Luke. Though their strength was limited, they always strived to eliminate monsters and protect the country. After chatting, the group simply left. Al truly thought his farming life would become quite difficult from now on. He also wanted to try accepting a quest. Since he was starting at G rank, the missions weren't too complicated. Helen explained that adventurers were ranked from G to SS, but SS was reserved for heroes, so practically it ranged from G to S. Only upon reaching C or B rank would one be considered a professional. Al's first mission was to collect 10 milk herbs in Grim Forest, the main ingredient for recovery potions. Helen also gave Al a cloak to assist him in his work. While fumbling through the forest on his mission, Al encountered a female orc trying to assault him. Just when he thought his life as a man would end there, Jake appeared and slew the monster. He also showed the 3 members of Jake's group a scale he had picked up earlier. Jake immediately recognized it as belonging to an unidentified creature that had been appearing frequently in Grim Forest lately. Though they didn't know what species it was from, the quality was quite good and could fetch a high price, so it wasn't bad. As evening approached and they were about to head back, they felt an overwhelming pressure that froze everyone in fear. A black dragon emerged and walked right past all 4 of them. This dragon seemed utterly unconcerned with the ants before it, striding arrogantly as if nothing had happened. Al turned to check its stats. The level difference was so vast that the status display became distorted and couldn't be accurately determined. Helen jolted awake in the middle of the night from a nightmare. Her complexion was poor, showing signs of worry because her memory had gaps again. She confided to Madame Wong that ever since returning from work, she couldn't remember anything that happened afterward. Wong was Helen's foster mother. Worried that she was overworking herself and affecting her health, she advised Helen to take a day off for a checkup to see what was wrong. But right after that, Al and Jake's group came to report to the guild master about the black dragon's existence in Grim Forest. According to the attack power Al had observed, it reached 230,000. This was power capable of obliterating an entire nation in the blink of an eye. Luke believed this was the evil dragon Ouroboros. Upon hearing this term, Helen felt so dizzy she nearly fainted, but she didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay and hear everything. However, the evil dragon had merely passed by and then vanished. Jake suggested they should immediately issue a warning prohibiting entry to Grim Forest. Al also presented the evil dragon's scale he had picked up. The moment Helen saw it, her expression changed dramatically. She recalled some vague memory from her childhood, but before she could grasp what it was, she collapsed unconscious. Madame Wong took her to her room to rest. Upon seeing the cloak Al was wearing, she appeared very surprised. Helen originally remembered nothing about her childhood, only her own name. The only thing she had brought with her was that very cloak. 15 years ago, Wong and her husband had found her unconscious by the riverbank and adopted her. But since then, she had never been able to remember her past. This seemed to be connected to that black dragon. Al decided to investigate the matter, because leaving it roaming the forest was far too dangerous. Though he was only G rank, he would ask around and search the library in the capital. Perhaps he would find some information. That said, after an entire day of reading, Al found nothing relevant. Even Al only had an attack power of 50,000. With the dragon's 230,000, no one would be able to stop it. He also wanted to learn about the capital's situation 15 years ago, when Madame Wong first found Helen, but such information was classified. Only those who reached a certain rank could access it. Fortunately, the princess stepped in to help. With her authority, Al gained access to the damage report from Honol village 15 years ago. He discovered that at that time, the village had been destroyed. A merchant had gone to the village to purchase goods, but upon arriving found only a pile of ruins. The army had also investigated the scales left behind in the village. They concluded they belonged to the evil dragon Ouroboros, something that should have disappeared long ago. Rumors said it was an immortal creature that fed on destruction and despair. But in a battle against its only natural enemy, the holy dragon Mirage, it had been destroyed. If the evil dragon had been resurrected, the world would be in grave danger. Al and Fal decided to visit the village to investigate further what had happened. The place was nothing but crumbling ruins, but Al heard a strange voice. Following its guidance, he found the ghost of a young boy floating in the air. However, only Al could see this ghost. The boy introduced himself as Rai. Rai had been waiting for a very long time for someone who could hear his voice. Rai noticed that the cloak Al was wearing looked exactly like his own. When Al explained that it was a gift from Helen, the receptionist at the Adventurers Guild, Rai immediately realized this was the very cloak he had worn when he was alive. It was an extremely rare magical cloak he had received from his father. Learning it was a magical cloak, Al draped it over both Princess Fal and himself so she could see Rai's presence. The young boy was moved to tears knowing his sister was still alive. Helen was also the sole survivor of this village. Rai explained that Helen's fragmented memories were her mind's way of protecting itself, for they contained nothing but terrible things. Both Helen and Rai were children who had lived in Honol village. While Rai was a mischievous boy who always dreamed of becoming a hero, his sister Helen worried he would overexert himself and get hurt. Life continued peacefully until the evil dragon set foot in their village. The dragon destroyed homes and slaughtered civilians. Those who survived and dared to resist only fueled its hatred further. For only those who had abandoned hope could become its source of power. The evil dragon absorbed the villagers' fear to strengthen itself. Though unwilling to accept it, the two siblings had no choice but to flee from that hellscape. But they had nowhere to run. Being just two children, the evil dragon caught up to them before long. The dragon didn't kill them immediately. Instead, it wanted to toy with its prey. The despairing expressions of humans were a delicacy to it. Once they had no more value to exploit, both their bodies and souls would be devoured whole. Rai used every last ounce of his strength to throw a dagger that lodged into the evil dragon's eye. To the dragon, it was nothing more than a mosquito bite, but it enraged him enough to lunge forward, intending to swallow Rai alive. The badly wounded boy lay sprawled on the ground. The evil dragon made sure the two children before him wouldn't die quickly. He wanted to savor their despair a little longer. In 15 years, he would return to this town and massacre everyone. Then he would enjoy his pleasure once again. Even if it cost him his life, Rai would never let that happen. He would definitely protect his sister. The dragon was impressed by the child's determination before him and decided to imprison his soul in this land so he could witness firsthand the tragedy awaiting his sister. With those words, the dragon vanished without a trace. Afterward, Rai breathed his last. His ghost had lingered in this place for 15 long years, waiting for someone who could see him. He also revealed that whenever the evil dragon destroyed a village or town, it would leave one survivor. When it awakened from its slumber, it would track down that survivor. This person would tell others about what happened, spreading the horrifying experience. A chain reaction would occur, forming a terrifying legend. The evil dragon would absorb all that fear, growing ever stronger. Its current target was the people of the royal capital. Rai hoped Al could stop the dragon and avenge him. Though Al's power was inferior, if he could wield a force opposite to despair, he could surely weaken the evil dragon enough to attack. Al immediately carried the princess back to the capital to report this. While the princess commanded the soldiers to evacuate the citizens into the castle, Al would go find Helen. The receptionist had somehow taken up a blade and ventured into the forest alone to face Ouroboros. 15 years had passed, and as promised, the evil dragon was ready to devour her terror-filled soul along with everyone in the city. Helen had now remembered everything. Learning that her brother's death was her fault, she collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Because she had been too slow, her brother had paid with his very life. And now, just because she was here, innocent people living in the capital would have to die. Helen begged the evil dragon to take only her life. This was exactly what Ouroboros wanted to see most: irresistible, delicious despair. But he didn't care whether Helen lived or died. All the inhabitants in the castle would be slaughtered, burned, and crushed. Their screams would be his most sumptuous feast. Helen's spirit completely shattered. She no longer wished to live and only wanted to join her brother. Dark energy gradually enveloped her entire body. But Al's strong hands grasped Helen's, stopping her from doing something foolish. The evil dragon was furious that someone dared to interrupt his meal. He swung his leg, sending Al flying into the distance. Though wounded, Al showed no fear and charged forward, throwing a punch at Ouroboros' face. The blow was powerful, but couldn't bring down the evil dragon. Al had no choice but to stand and fight one-on-one, continuing to rise in battle, even after being blasted away by its fiery breath. He fought while leading Helen to escape. He also relayed the message Rai had left for his sister. Rai had no regrets about saving her. He knew she would torment herself, but as the survivor, her duty was to live happily for everyone's sake and live a life that would make him proud. Al had come to give Helen hope for living, to tell her that no matter how dire the situation, if she tried, she could still turn things around. Never give up. That was also Ouroboros' weakness. Seeing his stats beginning to decline, the evil dragon was no longer as arrogant as before. He dove from the sky toward where Al stood, intending to kill the obstacle before him. But now Al's power could completely overwhelm his enemy. With just one strike, the evil dragon fell backward and died. Just when it seemed everything was over, Helen suddenly grabbed a knife and stabbed straight into Al's stomach. Her eyes held the same malevolence Ouroboros once had. Facing this fatal blow, Al could only collapse. But Helen gave him no rest, continuously slashing at him with the knife. The person standing before Al was no longer Helen, but merely a puppet controlled by Ouroboros. Just as Al thought his life would end here, the holy dragon Mirage appeared to protect him. Seeing his mortal enemy, the evil dragon showed no anger. He had only intended to play around with this body for a bit, never expecting to be interrupted. He paid no mind to the holy dragon's appearance, for there was good reason. Right after healing Al, Mirage collapsed, gasping for breath. He explained that this body couldn't exist for long. The power he had just bestowed upon Al could be used to purify the protective layer on Ouroboros' host. Only then could he save Helen. The evil god laughed, knowing this was someone very important to Al. Surely the boy wouldn't dare attack him. But to his surprise, Al stepped forward and punched Helen straight in the stomach. He had seen her true eyes beckoning him. Even while possessed, she didn't want to hurt anyone with her own hands, so she asked him to put an end to both herself and Ouroboros. The evil dragon couldn't let him accomplish that so easily. He seized the moment Al let his guard down to grab him, his spirit emerging to merge with Al's body. But upon entering Al's heart, he found nothing at all. Only an unwavering dedication to farming. Images of Al tilling soil, sowing seeds, tending crops, and harvesting produce left Ouroboros stunned. There was absolutely nothing for him to exploit, and he was expelled back into Helen's body. Knowing the evil dragon could no longer resist, Mirage decided to unleash his final technique to erase his existence. His own body also faded away. Before vanishing, he didn't forget to look back at the unconscious young man behind him and express his gratitude. The dark clouds gradually dispersed, giving way to light returning over the capital's sky. The princess knew Al had driven away the evil dragon. He was being cared for in the Adventurers Guild infirmary. Princess Val joyfully embraced him the moment he woke up. Helen explained that thanks to Al and Mirage, Ouroboros had been purified. It seemed Mirage had exhausted all his power and vanished afterward. Though she had been possessed by the evil dragon, she was now completely stable. However, she could now use his power within her own body. This frightened her somewhat, but then she thought that this power once used only for killing might now be used for saving lives. Besides, her duty now was to live happily. Otherwise, Rai's sacrifice would be in vain. Moreover, she had the care and support of the adventurers, the guild master, and Madame Wang. Everyone decided to celebrate this victory. The atmosphere was lively throughout the guild headquarters. Only Al kept thinking about returning to his fields to harvest his crops. This couldn't escape Princess Fal's notice. She just wanted Al to enjoy himself to the fullest because this was what he deserved. When she had stood in the castle awaiting Ouroboros' attack, she knew she couldn't do anything. But thinking of Al fighting out there, she told herself she had to give everything she had. The next morning, Al returned to his daily life, harvesting crops with Testa. This was when he felt happiest. Then the mailman Reeks came to deliver a letter. In it, his father said his parents were well. They were very surprised to learn he had moved to the capital. No matter what anyone said before, he had only wanted to farm and never wished to live somewhere as bustling as that. They had also moved to the city of Ruigus and wanted Al to visit since it had been so long since they'd seen him. But first, Al had to notify the Adventurers Guild and transfer the quests he had accepted to others. Hearing this, Helen readily took them over. 2 or 3 times a week, she accepted subjugation missions. Using Ouroboros' power, she had registered as an adventurer and quickly risen to F rank. With everything arranged, Al was about to set off when he found Fal wanting to come along to conveniently meet his parents. But Al absolutely couldn't agree. If his parents found out he was acquainted with the princess, who knew what would happen? Al walked happily down the road to Ruigus, his mind constantly thinking about the top-grade fertilizer he could buy there, then bring back to grow delicious tomatoes. Just thinking about it made him happy. This guy was truly addicted to farming. It was also because of all the recent chaos with monsters and Ouroboros that he had forgotten he was just a farmer. But bad luck wasn't done with Al yet. Another orc stood blocking his path. This time it was a male. Al thought nothing would happen, but things gradually got worse when he realized the green-skinned monster wanted to violate him, sending Al running for dear life. It started pinning him down and pushing hard. Al's manhood was about to become nothing but a fleeting memory. Fortunately, this time he was saved by an unfamiliar female swordswoman. Still shaken from what had just happened, Al thanked the unfamiliar girl while catching his breath. Seeing that Al was around her age, the girl didn't stand on ceremony and introduced herself as Ruri. When she learned Al was also heading to Rurugus like herself, Ruri decided to join him. She wasn't comfortable seeing him travel alone anyway. If he encountered another orc attack, it would be very dangerous. The two walked and chatted, quickly venturing deep into Grim Forest. The place was deserted, and strange sounds were approaching them. Both drew their weapons and took defensive stances. In the end, it was just Reeks coming to deliver mail. This time it was a letter from his mother. Al frequently received letters from his parents like this, and before long, the pile had grown too high to count. Al mentioned he was going to Rurugus to visit his parents and also to buy fertilizer for his crops. Once farming came up, he rambled on endlessly, leaving Ruri completely confused. Al also asked about her family. A girl traveling alone like this must have a worried family. But Ruri avoided the question, saying she was fine and nobody worried about her. Al didn't press further, knowing everyone had their own circumstances. As evening fell, Ruri pulled out a tent from a pouch on her belt. The pouch was like a magical bag that could hold a tent and all sorts of other items. It was an heirloom passed down from her ancestors. During dinner, Ruri mentioned she was traveling to Rurugus to train herself. She had also heard a strange rumor about many unexplained accidents occurring. The victims had seen demons appear, but couldn't remember what they looked like. The Adventurers Guild couldn't dispatch people based on mere rumors, so Ruri decided to investigate on her own. She also revealed that she was a descendant of the hero who had slain the Demon King. In times of crisis, she was confident the power inherited from her ancestors would accomplish something. That was her mission. But Al worried that even so, she was still a girl. The moment he said this, Ruri was left speechless. This was the first time anyone had shown such concern for her. That night, the two slept in the same tent, and nothing happened between them. However, sharing a tent with someone who slept badly and was as strong as a monster like Ruri left our poor Al considerably battered. The next morning, they arrived in Rurugus. Ruri bid farewell to her newly acquainted travel companion. This was her first time traveling with someone else, and she felt very happy. If possible, she wanted to stay with him longer. It was also Al's first time visiting somewhere other than his village and the capital. He would stay here for a few days before returning to the capital, so he wanted to hire Ruri as an escort when that time came. Ruri happily agreed and even drew the location of her inn, so he could come find her when he was done. For now, the two parted ways. Ruri went around asking the townspeople about demon sightings, but didn't hear anyone mention the issue. While investigating, a voice screamed from a deserted alley. She rushed over, and a woman there said demons had appeared and kidnapped her younger sister, pointing toward Illusion Forest where the demon had fled. Hearing this, Ruri immediately gave chase, unaware that a man was secretly following her. Al's homecoming, on the other hand, was full of turmoil and chaos. His mother, Lucica, was excellent at cooking and housework. Thanks to her kindness and energy, she was well liked by everyone and was very beautiful. However, she had one fatal weakness. She loved her son far too much. His father was an extremely henpecked husband. Every time the old man tried to discipline his son, Al's mother would mercilessly beat her husband. If Al hadn't spoken up for him, he probably would have died long ago. When Al decided to live on his own, his father had said a few words in support. Unexpectedly, that time he had to be revived countless times. Learning that Al had come to buy brine, his father pointed him to the salt factory on the outskirts. While locating it on Al's map, he noticed Ruri's marked symbol and looked puzzled. At that marked location, there was no inn at all. Al also asked his father about the unexplained accidents in this area, but the old man had never heard of such things. There hadn't been any demons lurking around here lately either. The next day, after obtaining the brine he needed, Al headed to the inn where Ruri was staying. A young man nearby shouted that he had been attacked by demons, and a blue-haired girl had fought them to free him. Al immediately asked for the location, and learned they were in Illusion Forest. Hearing this, Al ran off without wasting a second, failing to notice the satisfied smile on the man's face. The man snapped his fingers, and all the people and scenery there vanished. Al ran while calling Ruri's name. Seeing a girl being attacked by a monster, he rushed in and struck down the creature. But strangely, he felt no impact at all. When the woman embraced him, the illusion faded away, revealing the foul-smelling mouth of a monster ready to chomp down on his head. Ruri burst out from the forest and slew the creature. This type of monster specialized in disguising itself as humans. No matter how many were killed, they kept coming. The man from earlier applauded what Ruri was doing. He also marveled at Ruri's stupidity for not realizing everything here was aimed at her. All of this had been staged by the man to lure the hero's descendant here and kill her. He introduced himself as Loki. His target wasn't Ruri but Al. He had learned that both Romeo, the former Demon King's division commander, and the evil dragon Ouroboros had been defeated by Al alone. Ruri didn't let him finish, charging forward with her sword to attack, but he countered her instead. She was no match for him at all. It was Al's turn to step up and fight. The two clashed with earth-shattering force, blowing away an entire section of the forest. Loki was considerably wounded, but his injuries could regenerate, so it wasn't a problem. Al also used recovery magic on himself while wondering why the demons were targeting him. Loki knew his opponent was stalling for time, but being a kind soul, he would tell Al anyway. He was eliminating factors that could obstruct his plans. The ones he had his eye on were Al and a girl who had just acquired the evil dragon's power, Helen. He also revealed that Al was a hero and possessed the power of the benevolent god, while the Demon King was granted power by the malevolent god. That was the short explanation. Now Loki would proceed to eliminate this threat to the demon race. He summoned monsters to attack. Al showed no fear and destroyed both disgusting worms trying to swallow him. Loki then cast magic, gradually overwhelming them until neither could resist. He had no intention of killing Al, only restraining him. From the start, his goal was merely to test what his opponent was capable of. But for Ruri, it was different. She would die right here. Seeing Al restrained before her, Ruri silently cursed her own failure. She remembered her parents' encouragement when she was young, remembered her determination to become an excellent and powerful hero. But now she could only lie there waiting for death. She had no words to describe it. Loki gathered magical power in his palm, intending to kill the girl before him with a simple strike. But unexpectedly, the monsters restraining Al suddenly turned to stone. That was because of the salt Al had brought. It had a coagulating effect useful for disinfection and many other things, like destroying the leeches clinging to Al. Loki was impressed by this farmer's fighting style, but looking at Al's battered condition, forget attacking, he could barely stand. Loki didn't pay much attention. Al didn't care about that. He charged forward, throwing his wobbly fist at Loki. He shouted that no matter what, he would save Ruri and wouldn't let Loki touch Helen. At first, Ruri couldn't understand why Al was pushing himself so hard, but then she reflected on herself. When faced with too much criticism, deep down she had only thought she could never become a hero and had given up. But Al never gave up on defeating that demon. No matter how battered he was, his only thought was saving her. Having power or not didn't matter, but one must never give up on helping and protecting others. That was what it meant to be a hero. Ruri grasped this truth and stood up, stabbing Loki. She couldn't believe something so simple had taken her this long to realize. Loki didn't care about the girl behind him. This stab wound didn't concern him at all. However, Ruri's unyielding spirit caused her benevolent god's power to awaken. A brilliant golden aura radiated powerfully from her body. The sword, imbued with the benevolent god's might, slashed at Loki. The demon, struck by this blow, couldn't regenerate. His entire body was torn apart and crumbled into dust. Al was speechless with surprise. He knew Ruri was a hero's descendant, but never expected her to be this powerful. His remaining strength gave out, and he collapsed, snoring away. Ruri then expressed her true feelings. She had fallen in love with Al. Al didn't wake up until nightfall. A good sleep had restored him, so the two headed back to town. In the dark of night, they sensed some ominous presence in the forest. Wave after wave of eerie sounds gave Ruri goosebumps. They drew closer and closer, and finally, their source revealed itself. It was Al's beloved mother. He was immediately terrified because if she found out Ruri was with him, she would beat the girl to death. Just thinking about it was scary. Al immediately picked up Ruri and ran for his life. The two barely made it back to town, only to discover the inn from before had been an illusion created by Loki. So Ruri found another inn to stay at while Al returned home. The house was chaotic as always, with the poor old man constantly taking beatings in place of his son. His mother always wanted him to stay, but faced with Al's determination, there was nothing she could do. She also reminded him not to take on too much responsibility. He was a kind person, but he shouldn't let that kindness suffocate him. Being a little selfish sometimes was fine. Al met Ruri outside town, and together they set off for the capital. Ruri wondered why Loki had targeted Al and reminded him to be more careful from now on, as the demons had started setting their sights on him. Al brought Ruri to introduce her at the Adventurers Guild. The moment Helen saw this girl, she asked what her relationship with Al was. Both immediately recognized a rival standing before them, and were determined not to give Al up to anyone else. A young boy was caught red-handed by Al stealing eggplants from his garden. Al wasn't angry because the kid dared to steal from his field. He was angry because the boy took vegetables that weren't ripe yet. They wouldn't taste good, so what was the point of taking them? But it was only because the boy was so hungry that he had done this. Seeing that, Al had no choice but to give the kid a cabbage to get through the meal. This boy's situation wasn't an isolated case. Due to constant monster attacks, trade routes from other countries had been cut off. Helen mentioned that since Al went to Rurugus, attacks had become more frequent. As a result, prices kept rising, and poor people couldn't even afford food. Right at that moment, the alarm bell for monster attacks rang out. Adventurers and soldiers had to stand against them outside the city walls, but their numbers kept increasing endlessly, making defense extremely difficult. Despite Helen and Rory joining the fight, monsters appeared infinitely and couldn't all be defeated. Then a cavalry unit rode in, led by a knight carrying the holy sword Levitin. Upon seeing this divine weapon, the monsters retreated and stopped attacking. That evening, the princess visited Al's home. She had come to say goodbye. They would likely never be able to meet again. Al didn't understand what was happening. He could only watch as the princess sadly boarded her carriage and departed. Thanks to the holy sword, people's lives gradually returned to normal. Monsters no longer attacked, and trade routes were restored. But since then, Fel never appeared again. Al continued receiving letters from his mother. His produce sales improved too. He silently thanked the kingdom of Antisburg for sending the holy sword to drive away the monsters. What a kind nation. But Reeks, who came to deliver his mail, disagreed with that sentiment. An announcement was issued throughout the capital stating that Princess Fall would marry the Prince of Antisburg. It was the same person who had wielded the holy sword against the monsters. Rory also wondered why monsters, which normally lacked intelligence, had been so obedient that day. At that moment, Al hurried to Helen to ask about Princess Fall. But 10 days had passed, and no one had seen or heard any news about her. He also showed the letter his mother had sent for Helen and Rory to read. She knew the capital had been frequently attacked by monsters lately, and intended to exterminate them all for causing trouble for her beloved son. But during her investigation, she had discovered something shocking. The holy sword Levitin had absolutely no power whatsoever. It wasn't the legendary holy sword at all. Its creator was just an ordinary blacksmith. Lucica had been the former captain of Shadow Puppet, so investigating such information wasn't difficult for her. Shadow Puppet was a professional intelligence unit, rumored to be able to obtain any information no matter how tightly guarded. But the most important piece of information was that the monsters attacking the capital had been summoned by a demon, and that demon was forced to do so because his lover was being held hostage. Therefore, the kingdom of Antisburg had used demons to attack them. Then they would sell their goodwill, using the condition of protecting the country to force the princess into a political marriage. So Al wanted to rescue the princess, and to do this, he needed the support of his 2 other girls. Entering Antisburg was very difficult, but Al had the perfect guide. It was Reeks, who could go anywhere. Meanwhile, Prince Neteris sat in council with the leaders of various kingdoms. Everyone fought to have the holy sword protect their own nation. But there was only one holy sword, and the other kingdoms had to compete for its protection. Some even offered 30% of their nation's wealth. Others pledged to reduce prices and waive all transaction fees. No one knew this was all orchestrated by the prince himself. Under his coercion, a demon named Gazelle was forced to act against his conscience, but Neteris couldn't care less about that. He only needed someone who obeyed him. If Gazelle didn't comply, his loved ones would pay with their lives. Princess Fall disagreed with what he was doing to his servant. To Neteris, this was necessary education for subordinates. Without being strict with them, how could one lead a nation? Just then, another knight came with urgent news. The carriage for the ceremony would arrive late. Hearing this, Neteris was furious. The ceremony would have many ambassadors, leaders, and nobles from various nations. He ordered his subordinate to arrange a suitable carriage immediately. After the knight left, he wanted to invite the princess to celebrate this momentous event, but Fal naturally felt no joy being here and flatly refused. Neteris didn't know that the subordinate just now was actually a spy tasked with infiltrating Antisburg. The carriage matter was to allow Al's group to smoothly enter the capital. Luggage for the ceremony on the carriage would pass customs quickly. Meanwhile, Reeks would gather monsters to expose Prince Neteris' scheme. If they could prove the holy sword was fake before everyone, the marriage contract would be void and the ceremony naturally cancelled. Only now did Reeks reveal his identity. He was a member of Shadow Puppet and a demon. He explained that many demons lived disguised among humans. From the moment he gained consciousness, he had owed Lucica a debt. Actually, human life felt more familiar to him. The demon being controlled by Neteris had also lived among humans for a very long time and had even fallen in love with a human girl. After the treaty was signed, they thought they could finally be together. But unexpectedly, Neteris took control of him. Princess Fal still couldn't believe she was in this unfamiliar place, about to marry someone she didn't love. If only she could see Al one more time. These words were unexpectedly overheard by Neteris. After having a queen, Neteris would be able to become king, ruling this country in both name and reality. He believed that with the Holy Sword, he could control demons to dominate Magus. Even now, Princess Fal remained sorrowful, but she believed this was for the best, sacrificing herself for her own country. Al's carriage had infiltrated the capital through the back gate. The entire place was in a festive atmosphere for the wedding. The castle area was naturally heavily guarded. They had prepared new clothes to disguise themselves as farmers coming to sell produce. Al's plan was to rescue Gazelle's girlfriend, who was imprisoned in the castle. Then they would bring her to the church and make Gazelle confess that the Holy Sword's power was fake. That would solve everything. Al was confident no one would give a farmer like him trouble. But the moment he stepped out, a knight stopped him. He casually said he had come to deliver produce to the palace. But how could the knights possibly believe such a foolish lie? They quickly assembled and chased after the people disguised as farmers. If they kept running, who knew when they could execute their plan? Helen threw Al straight into the castle for him to handle things inside, while the two girls dealt with matters outside. The place Al landed was unexpectedly the very room where Gazelle's girlfriend was imprisoned. He easily took down all the guards there, but there were still too many enemies. He had no choice but to carry Gazelle's girl and run for his life. Making it outside, he regrouped with Helen and Rory, but they had no time to breathe. Behind them, an entire army was chasing the three intruders. The church bells had begun to ring. If they didn't hurry, the ceremony would begin. Following the original plan, the two girls would stay to buy time while Al ran straight into the church. Before leading Fal into the hall, the king asked his daughter one more time if this was truly her final decision. But Fal said she was fine. This was for Magus. The priest had begun the ceremony. At that very moment, deep in her heart, she still wished that Al would come save her. She didn't want to marry the man standing before her. Just as their lips were about to touch, the chapel doors came flying from somewhere and flattened Neteris. Al strode in as if nothing had happened. Fal was so overjoyed she burst into tears, unable to believe what had just happened. At this point, Neteris finally knew who his rival was. He immediately shouted that Al had come to kidnap the princess, but Al coldly accused Neteris, stating that the holy sword he possessed was completely fake. Everyone present was thrown into confusion upon hearing this. Neteris froze for a moment, but then burst into laughter. He knew no one would believe that. Even the king of Magus himself said he had witnessed monsters fleeing before that sword with his own eyes. Not just him, but everyone seated here had witnessed it too. Al remained unmoved by these words because he held the trump card. Outside, monsters led by Reeks had surrounded the entire capital. Everyone begged Neteris to use the holy sword to drive away the monsters, but he hesitated and kept calling Gazelle's name. Gazelle had now reunited with his girlfriend. He couldn't care less about that prince anymore. Reeks had brought the holy sword. Neteris knew that once he picked up that sword, everything would be exposed. Al stepped forward, snatched the sword, and threw it toward the monsters surrounding the church. They easily bit the fake sword to pieces. Gazelle also accused Neteris of threatening him and sending monsters to other kingdoms. Those monsters would be withdrawn by him after soldiers raised their swords as a signal. In other words, it wasn't the holy sword's power that repelled the monsters, but a monster-controlling flute that only demons could use. Faced with these accusations, Neteris showed no fear but laughed maniacally. Because last night, he had sent a horde of monsters to Magus. With both the king and princess of the kingdom here, the capital would have no way to fight back. He had scattered monster corpses throughout the country to lure them there. His plan was to annex Magus into his territory after it was devastated. But he never expected that the soldiers and adventurers in Magus had been trained by Helen and Rory. People who wanted to protect their own country with their own hands. Al walked up to Fal and told her she no longer needed to sacrifice herself alone. Neteris' soldiers also realized they had been serving a tyrant. All of them dropped their weapons and surrendered. Neteris could no longer resist and had no choice but to raise his hands and submit to arrest. The princess rescue mission was a success, and Al gained another wife for his harem. But the true mastermind behind this destructive plot had yet to appear. Even Reeks couldn't find out who it was. Peace returned to Magus. The Adventurers Guild had also rendered great service, and quest requests poured in increasingly. Princess Fal personally came to reward them. Her main purpose this time was also to intimidate the other wives and openly compete for Al. Al returned to tending his farm, but now with several wives behind him. His life was no longer the same as before. Fal was confident that Al had traveled to another country to save her, but Rory's life had also been saved by Al. The two of them just wanted to know who Al liked more. But this farmer didn't want to get caught in such drama. He refused to answer and simply immersed himself in the joy of farming. It was also because Al already had another girl in his heart. Even though it had been a long time since they met, he always thought of Elvia, his childhood friend. Syl's village, 15 years ago. Al and his father were harvesting crops. From a young age, he had a special fondness for farming. One day, he came across a little girl who had been caught stealing. The villagers saw that she was just a child all alone and assumed her parents had either abandoned her or perhaps died. Though they pitied her, they had no choice but to hand her over to a slave merchant. If they left her be, she would surely steal again. This child had been living alone in the mountains, surviving by stealing food. Al felt sorry for her and brought her hot food, but faced with her wariness, he could only leave the bowl of soup and walk away. As time passed, Al brought food his mother had cooked every day. Gradually, the little girl stopped being on guard and began to accept Al. For Al, seeing people enjoy their meals was the happiness of a farmer. It was only then that he finally learned the little girl's name, Elvia. Just when it seemed this would be a peaceful time for them both, the adults discovered their hiding place. Al knelt down and begged them to release Elvia, promising to repay everything she had stolen. He couldn't do it immediately, but he would till many fields and grow many vegetables to compensate. But even so, they still wouldn't agree. Just then, Al's father happened to pass by. The old man had considerable influence in the village. He offered his own family's rice to compensate for the damages. The two men had nothing more to say and happily let it go, no longer selling Elvia to the slave merchant. The only question was whether his beloved wife would kill him when she found out. Elvia also returned the potatoes she had previously stolen from Al, but the old man had no intention of taking them back. He even agreed to bring Elvia home and adopt her. 2 months later, Elvia had grown accustomed to life on Al's family farm. She always clung to Al and never played with anyone else but him. Now that the family had 4 members, Al's father wanted to find a more suitable place, so he decided to go to the capital to look for a house. The parents left the housework to their 2 children. Meanwhile, the troublemaker Testa had discovered a treasure map near the village, but the adults had forbidden him from entering the forest because it was very dangerous. With Al's parents away, the 2 boys planned to get past the killer bees guarding the forest's edge and venture deeper inside to find the treasure. Perhaps they could pick up a gem as a gift for Elvia. Along the way, Al told Testa he wanted Elvia to become closer to the villagers, but he didn't know she was being bullied and ostracized by them. Whenever Elvia walked alone, the villagers would throw stones and hurl insults at her. Yet she never told Al about any of this. Only now did Al understand why his parents had been so determined to buy a house in the capital. He was disappointed in himself for not realizing it. Following the marked location on the map, the 2 arrived before a sheer cliff face that looked unremarkable. But Testa accidentally triggered some kind of mechanism that pushed both of them inside. The 2 boys found themselves inside some kind of ruins. They touched a stone tablet carved with strange symbols. It suddenly emitted light, and Al's consciousness was swallowed by some evil entity. A powerful tremor followed as rocks and debris flew everywhere. The volcano outside the village had awakened. Al didn't know how he had managed to return, but the moment he woke up, a sharp pain pierced his heart. When he stepped outside, all Al could see was a screen of black smoke. Volcanic ash covered everything from houses to fields. The villagers had evacuated to elsewhere because of this, but the only bridge had been destroyed, leaving them stranded here. Food grew increasingly scarce. Though everyone searched desperately, supplies continued to dwindle. Al went to the fields to see if anything remained, but not only did he find nothing, he was constantly tormented by pain. Elvia knew she had to do something, so she went to the village chief's tent to steal food. But she remembered what Al had told her before. She hesitated and decided not to do it. To take care of Al, the little girl had given him all of her own food, lying that they had received aid from the capital. From then on, she ate nothing more. Her body wasted away until she finally collapsed. Her lifeless eyes slowly closed. Al crumbled before Elvia's body. Only then did he realize how much the little girl had sacrificed for him. He blamed himself, believing he was the one who had caused Elvia's death. Time passed. Now he could grow more and better produce, but Elvia could no longer taste any of it. While Al was leisurely exterminating monsters as requested by the guild, he discovered an unconscious girl lying on the road. Unable to leave her there, he brought her home. At first, she seemed a bit frightened about being taken home by a man, but when she learned Al only wanted to help, she relaxed a little. Her name was Linnea. She had been on her way to the Adventurers Guild in the capital to submit a request about inexplicable abnormalities in the town where she lived. Given this vague information, Helen worried that no adventurer would accept such a request, but Al volunteered to investigate. Moreover, hearing that Linnea's town was Gal, a place famous for its asparagus, the spirit of a produce fanatic awakened within him. Before leaving, he also bought new clothes for Linnea. The 2 were lucky enough to hitch a ride on a carriage to Gal. The carriage owner mentioned that lately, Gal had been refusing to trade with other towns. On the way, they were chased by a pack of orcs. Seeing those perverts, unpleasant memories surfaced in Al's mind, and he passed out cold. Linnea put a necklace around Al's neck, the same kind she was wearing. It had the effect of stabilizing one's spirit, so she hoped it would help him overcome that nightmare. The moment they arrived at the town gate, they were stopped by guards. But as soon as they saw Linnea's face, they stepped aside and caused no more trouble. Once inside, Al noticed the soldiers here were using mops as weapons. At first, he didn't find it too strange and stopped at some roadside food stalls to ask around. But the vendor said nothing was out of the ordinary while handing him a skewer burnt completely black and inedible. The vendor kept staring wide-eyed for some reason, continuously repeating the same phrase, sweat pouring uncontrollably. On the street, a man transporting vegetables showed the same symptoms. By now, Al truly realized something abnormal was happening in this town. But before he could find out why, two cloaked figures treated him like merchandise and carried him off. For now, Linnea invited him to her home to rest. Her family ran a necklace business. Thanks to the necklaces containing the benevolent god's protection, she and Al weren't affected by the strange occurrences here. Ever since the town became strange, Linnea's parents had disappeared, leaving her alone. Witnessing these bizarre events, Al had no choice but to investigate seriously. The townspeople were no different from madmen. No one was lucid enough to question. Al's presence as someone different on the streets also caught the attention of Lord Ramol. Al was standing before the very person who had revolutionized asparagus farming and couldn't help but admire him. Ramol said that asparagus had accompanied this town's development. He also wore a necklace like Al's, so he had noticed the strange things happening in his town. He invited Al to his mansion to talk further. But the old man was clearly hiding something. Linnea noticed it too. Why was the Lord so completely lucid, yet still staying in this town without any intention of going outside for help? Al thought he must have some reason. They would find out when they met tonight. Linnea feared that someone as naive as Al would be deceived by that old man. But Al was confident he could resolve all of this. Inside the Lord's mansion, displays were filled with images of asparagus and various vegetables. The moment Al sat down, he brought up the town's abnormalities and asked the Lord if he knew what was happening. Ramol smiled coldly and said Al didn't need to concern himself with that anymore because he was surrounded by soldiers, but Al was a farmer with monstrous strength. Ordinary people couldn't possibly restrain him. The soldiers were immediately taken down, leaving only old man Ramol sitting there. When Al charged forward to attack, Linnea stopped him. Only then did Ramol reveal his plan to dominate all of humanity. The one controlling Ramol from behind was Vritra, a demon of noble lineage. He could steal the consciousness of those he possessed, just like the Lord sitting there. But he could only control one person at a time, so he had created a gem that was the crystallization of his power and buried it inside the goddess statue in the town center. Thanks to this, all the residents here were under his control. His next target was the capital, but he had heard an interesting rumor. A human had defeated both Romeo and Ouroboros. If he could implant the gem into that person's body and dominate humans, his influence throughout the demon world would increase. In other words, luring Al here was part of his plan. He had taken Linnea's parents hostage so she would lead Al to this place. Al stopped resisting and let Vritra do whatever he wanted. The demon laughed as he slowly brought the gem toward Al's face. Linnea couldn't contain her emotions. She knew Al was a kind person and couldn't let him be harmed here. She screamed to stop Vritra. Yes, surely screaming would make him stop. But Al suddenly smashed the communication stone, signaling Helen and Rory outside to destroy the goddess statue. The two girls had been investigating in parallel with Al. From the start, they knew it was the cause of the strange occurrences in the town. Al's mission was to infiltrate the Lord's mansion to confirm it. Vritra's plan had failed. Linnea's parents were rescued. But Vritra still had the Lord as a hostage. He didn't believe Al would harm such a respectable person. But Al knew Ramol loved asparagus from the bottom of his heart. He knew the Lord wouldn't let his precious asparagus be ruined in the hands of that demon. Even Vritra didn't expect that this ultimate brain-clearing asparagus technique would actually work. By chewing on some asparagus, the Lord broke free from his controlling spell. The demon was sent flying out the door by a mere human food. The mission was complete, and Al had gained another wife for his harem. Blue skies, golden sunshine, fresh produce. What could be more wonderful for Al? Moreover, he had a lineup of helpers in his fields, a princess, a hero, and an Adventurers Guild receptionist. Fal was jealous of Rory and Helen because they had received gifts from Al. They were being paid for helping with the incident in Gal Town. The three were complaining that wherever Al went, another girl appeared. If they weren't careful, they would have to compete with dozens of others. Suddenly, a shriek rang out. Al's face darkened as he watched the five-fingered plants crawling all over the ground. These demonic plants sucked all the nutrients from the surrounding vegetables. Just a moment's inattention, and they had grown to this extent. It really drove Al crazy. His greatest enemy wasn't the demons or monsters, but this weed. They brought their produce to sell at the market in the capital. There, he often met acquaintances like Jake and the King of Magus. The king often disguised himself as a commoner and strolled around the castle, always asking Al to become his son-in-law. But Al always refused, not wanting to get married at this time. The king frankly said he would give him the agricultural land to the east and even provide newly developed farming tools. Hearing this, the farming fanatic was practically hypnotized into agreeing immediately. Suddenly, Al heard the voice of some goddess. The sound was fragmented, making it impossible to hear clearly what she was saying. But then he abruptly returned to reality. The king bid him farewell and returned to the castle. The produce had all sold out. Finally, he had enough money to buy herbicide to eliminate those 5-fingered plants. After buying the herbicide, Al witnessed something that made his blood boil. A slave merchant was about to kidnap a little girl and take her away. Al rushed in and took down the 2 thugs immediately. Seeing this, the merchant abandoned his goods and ran for his life. The little girl's name was Julia. Like Reeks, she was a demon, but her status was much higher than Reeks. She was the daughter of the Demon King, the next ruler of the demon realm. Julia had wandered here searching for someone who could save the demons. The story began when Vopel, who had always taken care of her, knelt down and said this place was very dangerous. At the very least, he had to save Julia. Then she was forcibly teleported here. She knew something terrible had happened back home, and they needed to hurry and rescue those left behind. But the demon realm was on the other side of the ocean. By ship, it would take 3 days. Al decided to help the little girl, and since traveling by ship would take too long, he carried Julia himself and ran across the ocean to reach the demon realm. The two stopped at an unnamed shore where Vopel was already waiting. Al sensed something strange about this man and stopped Julia from approaching. The little girl trusted that the person who had always cared for her since childhood couldn't possibly be a bad person. But Vopel suddenly raised his hand and cast a lightning strike. The bolt nearly killed Julia. Before the little girl could regain her composure, he continuously fired magic at both of them. Al struggled to block and dodge those attacks while protecting Julia and looking for a chance to counterattack. His power was not to be underestimated. After a difficult battle, Al finally landed a kick right in Vopel's face, knocking him unconscious. Julia still couldn't believe someone who had always been so gentle could attack her, but it was only for a moment before he woke up, attempting to ambush Al. However, Al's mother appeared from behind and knocked him out cold with one hit. She had heard from Reeks that her beloved son had infiltrated the dangerous demon realm alone, so she rushed here to protect him. This Vopel had truly been controlled by something. He was the strongest mage among demons, always by Julia's side as her caretaker, never leaving her for even a moment, even to a somewhat obsessive degree. The 3 continued toward the demon castle. The soldiers here had all been killed. Not a single survivor remained. They seemed to have been controlled by someone and made to fight each other to the death, just like what happened to Vopel. Julia burst through the doors and ran into the main hall. Her father also lay unconscious, bleeding profusely. Al noticed someone was still alive and approached to ask. This person was relieved to see Julia was safe. Before they could celebrate, Lucifer raised her sword to kill the little girl. Fortunately, Al stopped her in time. From the very beginning, Al knew she wasn't his real mother. The real Lucifer would have rushed over to hug her son to death the moment they met. But this person was so cold, she had to be an imposter. The imposter didn't expect Al to have such sharp eyes. She didn't bother hiding anymore and revealed her true identity. It was someone Al had thought died long ago, Elvia. His little sister Elvia seemed to have become a completely different person. Al truly couldn't understand what was happening. In his memory, Elvia should have died long ago. Who was this person standing before him? As if to answer his question, Elvia said she was alive thanks to the malevolent god, who could swallow all the pain and sorrow in the world. The power she possessed was the power of the malevolent god. Then, without another word, as if to demonstrate that power, Elvia struck at Julia. That casual wave of her hand caused the palace to explode. Al barely survived the attack. Elvia wasn't surprised her brother was still alive. She said it was because the malevolent god's power inside him was still sealed. His stats had skyrocketed ever since he received the title Nature's Beloved precisely because of the malevolent god's skill. If he wanted to know more, he should join the malevolent god's side like her. Then he would receive even more power. Hearing this, Al seemed to go along with it, but Julia's scream snapped him awake. This inadvertently angered Elvia, who seized control of the little girl. At the same time, she threatened Al that she would kill all his loved ones if he didn't join her side. Faced with utter helplessness and about to charge in desperately, the necklace Al was wearing suddenly began to glow. Time froze before Al's eyes. The benevolent god appeared before him. She had long been obstructed by the malevolent god, but thanks to the necklace serving as a medium, she could finally connect to this world. However, this time stopping power couldn't last long. Though it was somewhat forced, she would now bury the malevolent god's power within Al and grant him her own power. The malevolent god had begun to notice and obstruct them, so they had to hurry. Al reached out and grasped the energy being bestowed upon him. With this power, he could lock his opponent's movements. She would also rewind time slightly so he could save Julia. The benevolent god thanked Al and hoped he would repel the malevolent god's invasion, then vanished. Time resumed flowing. Al used the power he had just received to create countless vines that bound Elvia. But they couldn't restrain her for long. She simply tore through the vines, grabbed her sword, and charged to finish off her brother. But Elvia had underestimated this power. No matter how many times she cut them down, the vines kept growing back to impede her. At that moment, Voppel arrived as reinforcement and fired a wave of magic at the enemy. But even this couldn't scratch Elvia in the slightest. She glided like the wind before Voppel and nearly killed him, but then stopped her hand. She had grown bored of playing and didn't want to kill anyone else, so she flew into the sky and left. She didn't forget to promise Al they would meet again soon. Voppel angrily grabbed Al by the collar to interrogate him upon seeing he knew the enemy. But both Julia and the Demon King stopped him. The Demon King knew Al was the one who had saved the demon realm and couldn't be treated so rudely. Even the Demon King himself didn't know who the malevolent god was, only that it was connected to his ancestors. But all related documents had been lost. If he learned anything, he would contact Al immediately. Though matters here had been resolved, upon returning to the kingdom of Magis, Al couldn't stop thinking about what Elvia had said. He couldn't remember when he had encountered the malevolent god. Could it have been when he stepped into those ruins? He went to ask Testa, thinking he might know something. Testa said that on that day, Al had suddenly collapsed. Then the volcano erupted, and afterward, the village was devastated. Hearing this, Al asked nothing more. He only told Testa to visit the capital sometime for a change of scenery. But Testa refused, saying there was too much work here and he couldn't go anywhere. The two parted ways. Al didn't know that Testa would never be able to leave this town. Al cut through the forest to return to the capital. This time, as always, he encountered orcs trying to assault him and was saved by Jake's group. Lamia wondered why Al was so powerful, defeating demons and evil dragons alike, yet couldn't kill a single orc. But these words truly made him think. He brought this question to Rory and Helen, but no one knew the reason. Helen checked his status and saw that his stats had decreased significantly compared to before. He no longer possessed the title Nature's Beloved. Al guessed it was because the skill the benevolent god had given him earlier had caused Nature's Beloved to disappear. He didn't want others to worry, so he kept this to himself. Reeks came to deliver a letter to Al. Lucica said she knew he was worried about many things, but there was still much she hadn't heard about either. Regardless, if he had any difficulties, the whole family would always be there to support him. Though many mysteries still needed answers, such as why Elvia was still alive and had appeared before him, who the malevolent god was, and what connection it had to the demons, Al decided to figure it out slowly later. Right now, he had 3 beautiful girls by his side, friendly companions in the Adventurers Guild, and nothing to worry about. He would continue focusing on growing the best produce while protecting everyone. Elvia stood atop a castle looking down, affirming that she would wait for the day Al would find her.